You said it in your head, maybe out loud, alone in the car, or in a bathroom mirror at 2 a.m. with your phone light in your face. You asked, you visualized, you wrote it on an index card and taped it to the fridge. You felt the certainty they told you to feel, that warm electric conviction that the universe was listening, that your thoughts were quantum signals reshaping the world around you. Then Monday came. Nothing moved. The job didn't call. The number in the account stayed the same. You blamed your vibration. You blamed your doubt. Nobody told you to blame the model. You called it manifestation. What if that was never the part that was true? Not the wanting, exactly. Something else entirely. Something physics never promised you, and something your mind has been doing this whole time without asking your permission. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud in this niche. The version of quantum physics that got sold to you in the manifestation industry is not physics. It's a metaphor wearing a lab coat. And I say that as someone who believed it for almost 3 years, who kept a vision board on my wall and a dog-eared copy of a quantum manifestation bestseller on my nightstand, who genuinely thought that if I stared hard enough at a number, reality would bend to meet me halfway. It didn't. And the worst part wasn't the disappointment. It was the shame that came after. The quiet, private conclusion that I simply hadn't wanted it enough. I remember the specific night I stopped believing it, though it took another year to admit that out loud. I'd been manifesting a specific number in my savings account for months, writing it on sticky notes, saying it in the shower, doing the whole ritual with the conviction of someone who genuinely thought conviction was the mechanism. The number never came. What came instead eventually, without any ritual attached to it, was a much smaller number, from a freelance gig I almost didn't take because it felt beneath the frequency I was supposedly holding. I nearly talked myself out of the one real opportunity in the room because it didn't match the fantasy I'd been rehearsing. That's the part that still unsettles me. The ritual wasn't just ineffective. In that moment, it was actively working against me, training me to dismiss real available opportunities for not looking mystical enough. That shame is not a personal failure. It's a design flaw baked into a story that was never built to be tested. Not a character flaw. A design flaw. Here's the claim, stripped down to its bones. Because quantum particles behave differently when observed, and because your mind is a kind of observer, your thoughts and feelings directly collapse probability into physical outcomes. Want the job hard enough, at the right frequency, and the universe rearranges itself to deliver it. It sounds scientific. It borrows real words: observer, collapse, probability wave. That's exactly why it works as a story. It has just enough truth in its vocabulary to disable your skepticism, and just enough emotional payoff to keep you buying the next course, the next deck of cards, the next 40-day challenge. You've probably seen the testimonials. Someone manifested a parking spot. Someone manifested a check in the mail the same week they raised their frequency. Here's the uncomfortable statistical truth underneath every one of those stories. If millions of people are visualizing thousands of outcomes every single day, a huge number of those outcomes were always going to happen anyway, on pure coincidence alone. Nobody posts the video where they visualize the check and it never came. The method isn't being tested, only the wins are being counted, and an untested method dressed in scientific language isn't a discovery. It's a coincidence with better branding. So let's ask the question the manifestation industry never once asked out loud. What does observation actually mean in physics? Not the poetic version, the mechanical one. Because if you get this wrong, you don't just get a science fact wrong. You get your entire relationship with your own effort wrong. You start believing that positive thinking alone is a causal lever on reality. And when it doesn't pull that lever, you don't question the lever. You question yourself. In physics, observation doesn't mean a conscious being noticing something with interest, hope, or emotional intensity. It means something almost embarrassingly unglamorous, a physical interaction between a quantum system and literally anything else, a photon, a detector, a stray air molecule, that leaves a measurable trace. A rock can observe a particle. A thermometer can observe a particle. Your feelings cannot, because your feelings are not a physical interaction happening at the particle's location. This single distinction is the hinge the entire manifestation physics narrative swings on, and it swings the wrong way. It's worth sitting with how strange that actually is once you see it plainly. The word observer in a physics paper carries none of the warmth it carries in a self-help book. It doesn't care whether the interaction was hopeful or dreadful, focused or distracted, held for a second or nursed for a year. It only cares whether a physical trace was left behind, recoverable, in principle, by anyone or anything capable of reading it. Strip the word down to that definition, and the universe responds to your intention claim doesn't just weaken. It loses the ground it was standing on. But, and this is the part that gets skipped because it's less marketable, the mistake isn't proof that you create your reality as nonsense from top to bottom. It's proof that the mechanism they gave you was wrong. Something in you does shape what you experience. Something in your attention, your expectation, your repeated behavior really does change outcomes in your life, sometimes dramatically. That part isn't mystical. It's just not quantum, and it's not instant, and it's not free. This resolves the shame, but it opens a harder problem. If the mechanism was never cosmic, then it was always yours to run, which means it was also always yours to neglect. Here's the mini revelation this whole episode is built around. Physics doesn't hand you a shortcut. It hands you something stranger, and if you're willing to look at it honestly, something far more useful than a fridge magnet with an affirmation on it. Not a shortcut. A different kind of work, slower to start, but far more reliable once it's running, because it doesn't depend on anything outside your own skull agreeing to cooperate. Beat. What if the real mechanism was never hidden at all, just too unglamorous to sell? That question is where we're going next. Not into vibration, into evidence. Picture a small dark room in a physics lab. A single machine fires one particle of light at a time, one photon, then a pause, then another, toward a metal barrier with two narrow slits cut into it. Behind the barrier, a screen records where each particle lands. Fire enough of them one at a time patiently over hours, and something happens on that screen that shouldn't be possible if each photon were a simple little bullet passing through one slit or the other. Instead of two clean bands lining up behind the two openings, the screen fills with a pattern of alternating light and dark stripes, the unmistakable fingerprint of a wave interfering with itself, as if each single photon had somehow gone through both slits at once and interfered with its own path. This is the double-slit experiment, and it is real, replicated, and one of the most solid results in all of physics. Now here's the twist that got hijacked by an entire industry. If you place a detector at the slits, any device, human monitored or not, that registers which slit each photon actually passes through, the interference pattern vanishes, the stripes disappear, the particles start behaving like simple bullets again, landing in two plain bands. Something about watching the particle's path changes its behavior, and right there, that single sentence is where the manifestation physics narrative was born and where it quietly lied to you by omission. You need this next part, because it's the part that gets cut from every manifest your dream life reel. The pattern doesn't change because a conscious mind cared about the outcome. It changes because introducing a detector, any detector, physically interacts with the photon in a way that destroys the delicate wave-like state that made interference possible in the first place. This is called decoherence, and translated into plain language it means something close to. Reality gets pinned down, the instant a system tangles with its environment in a way that leaves a permanent, in-principle readable trace. A camera does it. A dust particle bumping the photon's path could in principle do it. Your desperate hope while sitting on your couch 3,000 miles away does not, because hope isn't a physical interaction with the photon. You can run this exact experiment with the detector switched off and a research assistant simply intending very hard to know which slit the particle used, and the stripes stay. Intention changes nothing measurably. Physical interaction changes everything. That gap, the one between someone cares about the outcome and the system physically interacted with its environment, is the exact gap the manifestation industry needed you not to notice. Beat. So if it was never about caring, what was Copenhagen actually arguing? The physicists who first sat with this result in the 1920s split into camps trying to explain it. The most famous camp, associated with Niels Bohr and known as the Copenhagen interpretation, proposed something genuinely strange. Before measurement, a quantum system doesn't have a single definite state. It exists as a spread of possibilities, described by something called a wave function, and only collapses into one definite outcome at the moment of measurement. This is real, respected, mainstream physics. What it does not say, and this matters enormously, is that the measurement has to be witnessed by a conscious mind, let alone a mind with a preference about the result. Later interpretations, and modern decoherence theory specifically, have moved even further from anything resembling consciousness causes collapse. Most working physicists today treat collapse as something explainable through interaction with a large, chaotic environment, no observer with feelings required. There's a second piece of physics the manifestation crowd loves to borrow, and it deserves the same honest treatment: the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The popular version you've probably heard is something like, you can't know everything about reality, so reality is basically negotiable. What it actually states precisely is that there is a fundamental limit to how accurately you can simultaneously know certain pairs of properties of a particle, position and momentum, for instance. The more precisely you pin down where a particle is, the less precisely you can know how fast it's moving, and vice versa. This is a real, mathematically airtight limit on measurement, not a metaphysical statement that your certainty about your dream house shapes its existence. It describes particles, it does not describe your bank account. Here's what all of this proves, stated as plainly as I can put it. At the scale of individual particles, the act of physically interacting with a system can change its measurable behavior, and reality at that scale is probabilistic rather than fixed in advance. Here's what it does not prove: that a human being's thoughts, unaided by any physical interaction, can collapse probability into a preferred outcome at the scale of jobs, relationships, or money. The distance between a photon and a job offer is not a small technicality. It's the entire argument. But physicists didn't stop at the simple version. They built a stranger variant decades later, specifically to close the loophole you might already be forming in your head. The one where you're thinking, sure, but what if the information about which path the particle took still existed somewhere, even if no human looked at it? So picture the same two-slit setup, except now, instead of a detector that destroys the pattern outright, researchers add a second device downstream, one that can, after the photon has already landed on the screen, either preserve the which path information or erase it. Run the experiment one way. Keep the path information available anywhere in the universe, even unread, and the interference stripes stay gone. Run it the other way. Erase that information before anyone could ever check it, and the interference stripes reappear, even though nothing about the photon's actual journey through the slits changed. This is the quantum eraser experiment, and pop science headlines love to twist it into "The future changes the past" or "Your choice retroactively rewrites reality." What it actually demonstrates is more precise and considerably less mystical. Interference depends entirely on whether which path information exists anywhere, in principle, recoverable in the universe, not on whether a conscious being ever looks at it, and not on when, relative to the photon's landing, that information gets erased. What it does not demonstrate is backward-in-time causation, conscious retroactive editing of events, or any mechanism by which a person's later choice reaches back and alters what already happened. The math works out consistently without needing a mind anywhere in the equation. You don't need to hold any of this in your head as trivia. You need to hold the pattern it keeps proving over and over in every version of this experiment researchers have devised. Physical information, not human attention, is the variable that moves the outcome. Every time the story tries to smuggle your consciousness back into the equation, the data quietly closes that door again. So if it was never your mind collapsing the wave, then what exactly was happening in your life every time manifestation seemed to work? Something was. People who practice visualization, gratitude, and focused intention do report real changes. Clearer opportunities noticed, better decisions made under pressure, relationships that shift. That part isn't fake, it's just not quantum. What's actually collapsing isn't a probability wave out in the universe. It's the field of options your own brain is willing to notice, weigh, and act on. A mechanism sitting entirely inside your skull, testable, ordinary, and, as it turns out, far more within your control than a cosmic vending machine ever was. Think about the last time you bought a car, or seriously considered buying one. For a week or two afterward, you probably noticed that exact model everywhere, at stoplights, in parking lots, in the background of a show you were half watching. It's not that more of that car suddenly appeared on the road. It's that your brain started flagging it as relevant and pulling it into your conscious awareness. Out of a sea of visual information it had already been quietly filtering out. That everyday experience is a small, harmless glimpse into something much bigger about how your brain actually works. And once you understand it, the honest version of manifestation stops sounding mystical and starts sounding almost boringly mechanical. Or think of the last time you learned a new word. For a week afterward, you heard it constantly, in a podcast, in a co-worker's sentence, on a billboard you must have driven past 100 times before without registering it once. The word didn't multiply in the world. Your filter changed. The information was always arriving at your senses in roughly equal amounts. What changed was which parts your brain decided were worth promoting into your conscious experience, and which parts got quietly discarded before you ever noticed them missing. For a long time, the common sense picture of perception was passive. Your eyes and ears gather raw data from the world, and your brain simply processes it, like a camera developing film. Neuroscientists working under a framework often called predictive processing. Researchers, including Carl Friston, and popularized more recently by Anil Seth, have built a substantial body of evidence pointing to something closer to the opposite. Your brain isn't a passive camera. It's a prediction machine running slightly ahead of reality, constantly generating a best guess about what's out there, and using incoming sensory data mainly to check and correct that guess, not to build it from scratch. Translated into something you can feel in your own life, your brain has already decided, largely below conscious awareness, what's worth paying attention to. Based on what it has learned matters to your survival, your goals, your fears, and your identity. Everything that doesn't match that internal prediction gets filtered down, dimmed, deprioritized, sometimes never reaching conscious awareness at all. You are not seeing the world as it is. You are seeing the narrow slice of it your predictions have already flagged as relevant, not the world, your model of it. This is also why the standard manifestation advice to just believe harder so often backfires in a way nobody in that industry seems willing to examine. Belief in this framework isn't a feeling you crank up like a dial. It's closer to a standing prediction your brain treats as reliable background information, and standing predictions get built through repeated, confirmed experience, not through a single afternoon of intense positive feeling. Trying to force belief through sheer emotional effort, without any confirming evidence behind it, is a little like trying to convince your own immune system a virus is harmless by insisting very sincerely that it is. The system isn't listening to your sincerity, it's listening to a longer track record. This is why two people can walk through the exact same week, the same emails, the same conversations, the same string of small events, and come away with entirely different stories about what happened. One person's predictive filter was trained to flag scarcity, so that's what got promoted to conscious attention. The closed door, the short reply, the bill. The other person's filter, trained on something closer to possibility, promoted the open door standing 3 feet from the one that closed. Same week, same raw data, different reality, assembled downstream of two different sets of predictions. Now bring that back to the fridge magnet and the vision board. When you repeatedly, vividly focus on a specific goal, a job title, a number, a kind of relationship, you are not sending a quantum signal into the void. You are retraining your own predictive filter. You're telling the part of your brain that decides what counts as signal versus noise to start flagging anything adjacent to that goal as relevant, worth noticing, worth acting on. The opportunity, the conversation, the sentence in an email you'd have skimmed past a month ago, none of it is new. It was always there. You simply weren't built yet to see it. Beat, Here's the rhetorical trap worth naming directly. Doesn't that just mean the manifestation people were right all along? Only about your brain instead of the universe? No. And the difference is not semantic, it's the entire practical stakes of this episode. If the mechanism is the universe rearranges itself around your desire, you are a passenger. Your job is to feel the right vibration and wait. If the mechanism is your predictive brain reallocates attention toward what you repeatedly focus on, you are the mechanism. Noticing an opportunity your filter now flags is only half the equation. The other half is that noticing changes nothing unless you act on what you notice, and action is not a frequency. It's a decision repeated on ordinary Tuesdays when nothing feels magic at all. This reframes the entire law of attraction conversation in one move. Attention is trainable, not magical, and attention alone, without behavior, is a filter with nothing flowing through it. This resolves the mystery of why visualization sometimes seems to work, but it creates a bigger problem than the one it solved. If noticing is only half the mechanism, then everyone who visualized and felt their filter shift and then still didn't act experienced the retraining without ever cashing it in. The opportunity got flagged by the brain and ignored by the person. That's not a failure of the universe. That's a gap between the noticing and the doing, and it's the single most common place this entire process quietly breaks down. Think about how often this actually happens in a given week of your own life. Your filter flags something, a message you could send, a person you could ask, a version of a project you're afraid is too ambitious. And in the half second after the noticing, a second, older prediction kicks in. This won't work. This isn't for me. I'll look foolish. That second prediction is also just your brain running a model, built from a different set of past experiences. It has no more authority over your future than the first one did. The only difference is that it's louder because fear-based predictions tend to get prioritized by a brain that evolved to survive threats before it evolved to chase opportunities. Recognizing that loudness for what it is, a competing prediction, not a verdict, is most of the actual work this entire episode has been circling. Not a vibration, a habit of noticing, married to a habit of acting. There's a study from the 1960s that gets cited constantly in education circles and almost never told as the scene it actually was. Researchers walked into an elementary school at the start of the year and gave every student a standard IQ-style test. They then told the teachers, falsely, that a randomly selected group of students had scored in a way that marked them as intellectual bloomers, on the verge of a big academic leap. Those students weren't actually any different from their classmates. The label was fiction. But by the end of the year, the bloomers showed measurably greater gains in academic performance than their peers, not because they were smarter, but because their teachers, believing they were, treated them differently. More eye contact, more patience, more challenging questions, more warmth when they struggled. This is the Pygmalion effect, documented by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson, and it deserves the same honest hedging every source on this channel gets. It does not prove that expectation alone rewrites outcomes through some invisible force. It proves something more specific and honestly more useful, that a person's genuine expectation of another person changes concrete, observable behavior, which then changes the other person's real-world results. The mechanism is behavioral, not mystical. Belief altered action, action altered outcome. Here's where it gets personal because the same architecture works when you point it at yourself instead of a classroom of 8-year-olds. Psychologists Hazel, Markus, and Paula Nurius introduced a concept they called possible selves, the specific, vivid mental images you carry of who you might become, the version of you with the calmer marriage, the finished degree, the steady income, the version of you who no longer flinches at their phone buzzing with a number they don't recognize. Their research, along with decades of follow-up work, suggests these imagined selves aren't decorative daydreams. They function as internal targets that shape which goals you set, which risks you're willing to tolerate, and which small decisions you make when nobody's watching. What it doesn't claim is that simply picturing the possible self is sufficient on its own. The research consistently shows the effect depends on that image being paired with concrete, repeated action, not vividness of imagination alone. Later research building on this idea has repeatedly found that people who can generate a specific, detailed possible self, not a vague, successful someday me, but a version with a face, a routine, a set of concrete habits, tend to set more effective goals and persist longer through setbacks than people whose sense of the future stays fuzzy. The detail isn't decoration. It's the difference between a target your predictive brain can actually track and a wish it has nothing to filter for. You. Yes, you mid-scroll on a Tuesday with 3 tabs open and a half-finished goal in a note app. This is where the theory stops being about researchers and starts being about your actual week. Every time you picture the version of yourself who already made the change, you're not sending a request upward. You're loading a target into the same predictive system we talked about a moment ago, and that target starts quietly reshaping what you notice, what you tolerate, and what you're willing to attempt. There's a third piece worth putting next to these two because it explains why some pursuit of a goal feels effortless and self-reinforcing, while other pursuit feels like dragging a sled uphill. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying people at the edge of their skill, doing work hard enough to demand full attention, but not so hard it triggered anxiety. Painters, surgeons, rock climbers, chess players, and found a recurring state he named flow. Total absorption, time distortion, a sense of the self dissolving into the task. What his research supports is that flow reliably follows a specific, learnable condition, a close match between challenge and skill, with clear goals and fast feedback. What it does not support is that flow can be summoned by intention or mood alone, disconnected from actually doing the difficult thing repeatedly enough to build the skill that makes flow possible. Put these three together, and a mechanism emerges that has nothing to do with particles and everything to do with a version of you that already exists as a possibility. You form a vivid, specific target, possible selves. That target reshapes what your predictive brain treats as relevant, exactly like it did with the car you were about to buy. You begin, even involuntarily, to treat yourself the way Rosenthal's teachers treated their bloomers, with more patience, more attention, more willingness to try the harder thing. And if you keep showing up at the edge of your actual skill, instead of retreating into passive hoping, you eventually cross into something that feels, from the inside, indistinguishable from what the manifestation industry promised, except it cost you months of unglamorous repetition instead of one electric visualization session. There's one more piece of evidence worth sitting with because it goes directly at the specific practice. The manifestation industry built an entire ritual around visualization itself. Picture a small experiment room again, this time with a piano keyboard and no sound. One group of volunteers practices a simple 5-finger piano exercise with their actual hands every day for a set stretch of time. Our second group never touches the keys. They simply sit still and mentally rehearse the exact same finger movements in as much vivid detail as they can manage for the same amount of time each day. Researchers scan both groups' brains before and after. The physical practice group shows expected changes in the brain regions controlling those fingers. The mental rehearsal-only group, the ones who never touched a key, shows measurable changes in nearly the same regions, almost as pronounced. This line of research, associated with neuroscientist Alvaro Pascual-Leone, is real and frequently cited, and it needs the same hedge every source on this channel gets. It does not prove that vividly imagining an outcome makes that outcome appear in the world. It proves something narrower and still remarkable, that mental rehearsal of a specific physical skill can produce measurable changes in the brain regions responsible for that skill, priming the body to perform it with less physical practice than would otherwise be required. The mental rehearsal group still had to sit down at a real keyboard eventually and let their primed brain translate into primed fingers. Imagination without eventual execution never closed the loop in this research, and nothing in the data suggests it would. Translate that into the manifestation conversation, and something clicks that the industry never quite says out loud. Vivid visualization isn't useless. It's real neurological rehearsal, capable of priming your brain for a specific behavior before you've performed it once. But rehearsal is not the performance. A pianist who only ever mentally rehearses never plays a concert. Hey, person who only ever visualizes the interview never sits in the chair. Beat. Here's the question this whole block has been circling. If the outcome can look identical from the outside, does the mechanism even matter? It matters enormously for one brutal, practical reason. The wrong mechanism tells you to wait and feel. The right mechanism tells you to notice and move. One of those is available to you literally right now, mid-video, with nothing external required. The other has been quietly costing you years. I want to talk to you directly for a second, not about physics. If you're the person who kept the vision board up for a year after it stopped working, who felt every single morning you looked at it, a small private hit of shame instead of hope, I need you to hear this clearly. That shame was never evidence you didn't want it enough. It was evidence you were handed a broken instruction manual and blamed for the instructions. You didn't fail a cosmic test. You followed a real leverage point, attention, expectation, repeated action, but you followed it through a mystical instruction set instead of the mechanical one. So half the leverage got wasted on waiting for a universe that was never going to reorganize itself around your feelings. Maybe you're not the vision board person. Maybe you're the one who rolled your eyes at the whole industry from the start, who never bought a single crystal or wrote a single affirmation, and who is still sitting here because some quieter question brought you. The question of why some people's lives seem to bend toward what they want, while yours keeps bending toward what you fear. You weren't wrong to be skeptical of the ritual. You were just as unaware as everyone else of the actual mechanism underneath it, because nobody selling the ritual had any incentive to explain it to you in terms this plain. Either way, here's what I don't want you doing when this video ends. Closing the tab, feeling briefly smarter and changing nothing. That would just be a more educated version of the exact same waiting. I know how that lands because I've done it too. Collected the correct information and then quietly filed it under interesting instead of actionable, which is its own kind of avoidance, just dressed in better vocabulary. Understanding the mechanism isn't the finish line here. It's closer to finally being handed the actual key, after years of pushing on a door that was never going to open from that side, no matter how sincerely you pushed. So here's the smallest possible version of this, small enough that there's no real excuse left. Pick one thing this week that your old fear prediction has been quietly voting down. One message, one application, one hard conversation, and do it anyway. Not because you suddenly feel ready, but because the readiness was never going to arrive first. It arrives after, as a side effect of having already moved. The version of you who gets the outcome you actually wanted isn't the version who finally vibrates at the correct frequency. It's the version who's already, quietly, retraining what gets noticed, and who backs that noticing with one small, repeated, unglamorous action nobody would ever put in a vision board caption. Go back to that car, that bathroom mirror, that 2 a.m. certainty you felt was quantum. It wasn't nothing, you just misread the machinery. The observation that changes outcomes was never a particle noticing your hope from across a probability field. It was your own predictive brain, finely pointed somewhere specific, doing exactly what it has always done, filtering the entire world down to what matters to the story you keep telling it about who you're becoming. Not magic, not luck, a nervous system, aimed and repeated. Every loop this video opened closes here, in the same place. The double slit never proved your desire could bend light. It proved that physical interaction, not feeling, decides what a photon does, which is the same rule your actual life has been running on the entire time. The eraser never proved your future choices reach back and rewrite your past. It proved that information, not intention, is the variable in motion. And the shame you carried every morning past that vision board was never proof you lacked belief. It was proof you'd never been shown where belief actually does its work, not on particles a continent away, but on the 6 inches of prediction sitting behind your own eyes. That's the twist underneath the twist. You were never powerless in this. You were just aiming the power at the wrong address, sending your attention up toward the universe instead of down into your own next Tuesday, your own next email, your own next unglamorous rep at the edge of your skill. Every framework this episode walked through, decoherence, prediction, possible selves, flow, points at the same coordinates. Not out there, in here, in the 6 inches behind your eyes, in the next small thing you actually do about it. Not the universe doing the rearranging. You quietly, becoming someone whose brain has already been told what to look for, and then showing up enough times for the looking to turn into something real. Here's the layer nobody tells you when they hand you the corrected version of this story. It's less comfortable than the mystical one, not more. A universe that rearranges itself around your feelings asks nothing hard of you. Just sincerity, just vibration, just waiting with the right expression on your face. Fair predictive brain that only reshapes your results once you've repeatedly acted on what it flags, asks for something much less forgiving. Actual behavior, on the days you don't feel like it, with no guarantee attached to any single attempt. That's a harder sell. It's also the only version that has ever once been true. The last quantum manifestation lesson you'll ever need isn't a physics fact at all. It's this. Stop asking reality to notice you, and start noticing what's already quietly within reach. If this is the version of the story you needed instead of the one that kept you waiting, staying here, subscribing, is how you keep training that same attention on the mechanism that actually works, instead of the one that never did. This channel exists for exactly this kind of correction. Real mechanisms, honestly sourced, instead of the version built to sell you a feeling. What are you noticing now? For the full framework behind this, the quiet force goes deeper than any single video can. And if this rewired how you see manifestation, the next episode goes even further, breaking down the one mental habit keeping most people stuck in the waiting room. Not a wish, a decision repeated.